I never really thought that I'd get into the survival horror genre. The fixed camera and tank controls of older games didn't seem appealing. I'm a bit of a scaredy cat and haven't played many horror games in general, and I'm also a meathead who has genuine problems with puzzles and non-linear navigation. Seriously, a lot of my friends can tell you that I get lost or turned around in games pretty easily. Over the last year and a half, I've been playing a lot of games from this genre and definitely feel like I've been missing out. Silent Hill 2 is one of those games I always heard about, and it's many people's favorite game of all time. I definitely had written it off just because of its age. I'm a bit of a new school gamer, so I usually play things like shooters and roguelikes, so I just never really had much contact with this genre at all. But after beating it, I realized it actually is that good, and it's actually one of the best games I played this year and probably in my life. The atmosphere in this game is immense. Traveling through the seemingly abandoned town sets the mood immediately, and then you're led to cramped hallways, foggy lakes, run-down hospitals. The game itself is very, very surreal. You start off at a random, dirty-ass rest stop with your only known goal of finding your wife, since you got a mysterious letter from her, even though she's dead. Throughout the game, you're learning more about the main character, James Sunderland, a seemingly normal white boy, but the town slowly starts shifting around James's sins and internal strife. The game starts off unsettling, but on James's journey, it quickly becomes more disturbing as you piece together the story and themes. The gameplay also leans into the surreal feeling you get. The combat is admittedly very clunky. It's very obviously not the main focus of the game, but it does somehow help the surreal feeling you get because a lot of the panic from fighting monsters comes from even being able to mentally register how to hit them or where they are. Sometimes you gotta bash them over the head, which is pretty funny. Or just blast them away with the limited amount of guns you have. And then you got followed up with a funny little kick to finish off the enemies. What I enjoy about this is how vulnerable it makes you feel. James is just a guy. He's not a super secret agent or a superhero with telekinetic powers. It really adds to the tension you have while you walk through Silent Hill. I honestly doubt the stiff combat and movement were intentional to the game's design and theming, but it actually does manage to enhance the experience, and I genuinely love that about this game. On my survival horror journey, I've noticed that resource management is a huge part of these games. Holding key items, heals, ammo, and inspecting other kinds of items or clues. I never really had an issue with heals or ammo with Silent Hill 2 because it builds its suspense and tension in other ways within the game, which I really appreciate. Pyramid Head reveal is probably the best example. You first come across him from across a hallway, and when you come back to that same hallway, he's just gone. So now you're walking around shitting your pants wondering where the hell he's gonna be, and the game does an amazing job of building like actual tension throughout. The puzzles are pretty engaging, whether it be through a poem or how to interact and combine certain items. I probably only had a couple that I got stuck on for a few minutes, and there was also a puzzle difficulty select at the start of the game which I thought was interesting. Most of the time it's less a puzzle and more just figuring out what the fuck this seemingly random item in your inventory does. The level design is based around finding out what's locked and then finding the corresponding key, which is something I had to accept about the genre because in most of these games you're pretty much corralled through what you're able to access, and backtracking is a huge part of it. If you're a dum-dum like me, you'll probably miss a key item and feel stuck unless you go back and look through every room. Something Silent Hill does to try to mitigate this is updating your map by crossing out doors you tried or marking areas you've been in red. Unfortunately, you can go through a room and miss a key item, but it does show certain objectives of objects you can interact with. Also, James actually turns his head towards items you can pick up, so getting lost or missing items was kind of a skill issue on my part, but it's really cool that they have a lot of in-world indicators for stuff like this. As I said before, I do get lost in games sometimes, but for this kind of game, I don't want a floating arrow pointing towards my objective, so this map updating system stays pretty immersive since the UI is very limited anyway. These systems are more of a helpful nudge rather than a full hand-holding. I really love the slow-paced aspects of this game. There are segments of this game that you notice become really drawn out and in a really trippy way. The beginning fog run, the seemingly endless stairwell, the long boat section. In these kind of stretched out moments, you start noticing that it's going on for a little long, and it gives a sense of introspection and dread as you go deeper and deeper into the mysteries of Silent Hill. There's a strong use of liminal spaces here with big wide open chambers, seemingly normal hallways that turn into a maze, and I know Silent Hill 2 didn't invent liminality, but I bet that this game inspired the liminal aspects of many modern horror games today. The back rooms. I also gotta mention the absolutely fantastic soundtrack that this game has, which really sets a great ambience for the game. There's a really interesting use of sampling that creates a great eerie mood. There's a selection of peaceful, laid-back tracks, and then some really energetic and moody and heavy shit. Honestly, the OST is wonderful and definitely worth a listen through. There's certain aspects of Silent Hill 2 that didn't age so well for me as a modern baby gamer. For the most part, the voice acting is pretty bad. I do think it manages to lean into the surreal feel of it, but I'm just not entirely convinced that this was the direction the original voice actors are going for.
No, I believe you. It's just, I guess I really don't care.
Some of it is a bit awkward, but a few performances were actually insanely good, like the letter at the end of the game, where the actress actually got choked up in the middle of the performance, and with the context of the scene, it was genuinely emotional and haunting. James is a really interesting main character. Up until the last hour or so of the game, there's a lot of mystery around his character since he's just as lost as you are. But as you progress through the story, you start getting more of a grasp on the situation, and you slowly realize what's going on until it comes to a pretty dramatic close. James's guilt becomes fully realized, and a lot of the things you encounter during the game become a lot darker after you realize what James did. This is the time to use the YouTube chapter function to skip ahead, because I would really encourage you to actually play this game, but you know, it's old and I'm going to talk about spoilers, so yeah, use the YouTube chapter function. Bye. Throughout the game, you meet different residents who seem off. You have Eddie, the bullied glutton, Laura, the seemingly random, out-of-place, mischievous child, Maria, the sultry one-to-one twin of James's late wife, and Angela, the suicidal, abused, depressive, with some of the most interesting cutscenes in the game. You meet these people seemingly randomly and out of place, and they never seem to be experiencing the same horrors that you are, with all the monsters and creepy shit going on. There are a couple of scenes where it seems like the entire world shifts, and that's pretty much exactly what's happening. When you cross over to an alternate hospital that seems extra dilapidated and creepy, or when you meet Angela in the burning hallway and she remarks that this is what her world always looks like. Silent Hill represents something different to every single resident there. More of like a trial for each person to mentally get through. To James, Silent Hill represents the repressed guilt of Mercy killing his bedridden wife. Yay! Woohoo! We learned what happened. Yeah, this game is a bit dark. It's a conflicted yet grounded love story that is insanely ahead of its time in terms of video game stories. There's also multiple endings that lead to a lot of different interpretations of what happens to James, and some funny endings like the UFO ending or the dog ending. The main endings are pretty thought out, and aside from the jokey endings, are pretty plausible for the main character. Regardless though, Mary's reading of her final letter is an unforgettable, heartbreaking listen. I played the modded PC version called Silent Hill 2 Enhanced Edition that fixes and updates the PC port to be more aligned with the original. Now, I actually wanted to play Silent Hill 2 because of the recent news about the remake. I think before playing it, I was pretty excited to hear about a remake, but after playing the original, I'm kind of worried if this remake would even be good at all. I'm not sure if it's going to translate well. I'm going to play it. It's probably going to be pretty fun. I can't imagine it'll be very similar to the original, other than story. After Silent Hill 2, I also played through SIGNALIS, a recent survival horror indie game released on October 27th, 2022 by Rose Engine, which I believe is a two-man team, which is very impressive. I had always seen fan art of this game on Twitter because lesbians, and I had a friend who played it, so I had a previous vague interest that led me to getting this game after playing Silent Hill. One thing that immediately grabbed me was the art style and aesthetic. This game's UI and general visual theming is fantastic. There's a lot of trippy tech visuals, you got crispy PS1 graphics in an anime style that are absolutely charming. A lot of the UI screens are dope, and the sound effects are just on point throughout this game. I really love how interactive everything is with how some of the puzzles move or how you can click buttons. Even flipping through the inventory is just really responsive, and it really adds into the immersion. It's something I really appreciate in games, and it just puts the quality on another level. The attention to detail in this game is amazing. I mean, the environments are just completely lined with moving pieces, flashing lights, so many small things that add to the world building. Something cool this game also does is the first person segments. While most of the game is isometric with one camera angle, some investigating or puzzle solving parts are in first person, and they really put you in the shoes of the main character, Elster. Is she wearing shoes? Like, where are her feet? Oh, stick leg ass. Another major aesthetic theme here is retrofuturism. That's a term, right? Where there are huge tech innovations like the replicas, which are like these biomechanical robot people, and space travel, but still using other tech like old-ass blocky computers with Windows 98 or cassette tapes. This blend of time periods keeps the game fresh and strays away from typical cyberpunk trash. There's also this really intriguing mixed national relations thing going on where there's a multitude of different languages all over the place, and it just keeps the game feeling really fresh, like you don't know what the fuck is going on. Got all this different technology, all these different cultures that are blended in. It's seemingly been that way for a while. There's a lot to read about different worlds, about current wars going on, who's in power. The world building is very strong. The combat is pretty similar to Silent Hill, but a lot faster paced. You have to actually aim and still finish the enemies off by stomping them. What's freaky though is when you're traversing through the freaky halls of SIGNALIS, the corpses of the enemies you defeat actually stay there the whole time, and they can actually resurrect unless you burn their body with a flare. There's different ways to deal with enemies, and they're generally pretty cool. They jump you with a disturbing scream and have different quirks on how they attack you. That combat encounter scream did actually scare me a couple times. That was pretty freaky. At the start of the game though, you're immediately booted up as Elster, a steward replica who discovers that her counterpart, Gestalt, is missing and not in her cryogenic pod. So yes, I'm immediately going to compare this to Silent Hill's story because it's one person looking for another person, and there's a lot of inspiration from Silent Hill, but I'll get into that later. The ship is empty, and it's immediately known to you that you have to find Ariane. Fuck, I gotta look up how to say the name, I forgot. It's immediately known to you that you have to find Ariane Young, the white-haired girl on the Polaroid that Elster finds. Seemingly ripping at the seams, Elster stares into a mirror and repeats an important mantra. On your journey, you go through a lot of beautiful environments spanning from abandoned ruins, frozen landscapes, and slowly start blurring the line between dreams and reality. SIGNALIS' storyline is delivered in a much more ambiguous way than normal survivor horrors. It places you directly in the surreal feeling and expects you to wade through it. Other aesthetic nods aside, I want to immediately compare it to something like Evangelion. It's a very surreal anime. It's kind of like if the creator threw a bunch of note cards together at you and then you had to piece together the story. I mean, it's not that complicated, but it definitely takes a patient person to piece it together, and it's very dense. So if you miss a major plot point, it's very easy to get lost in the weeds, and I would definitely suggest that you be patient, take your time, and just get lost in the world of SIGNALIS. You're given a lot of bits and pieces of lore everywhere. It's a bit complicated to someone with a short attention span like me, but it's fun to just take it in throughout the game and just theorize about what's even going on. There's a lot of strong themes to identify, memory and identity being large ones. Alright, once again it's spoiler time because I don't know how to talk about this game without spoilers, so Replicas are biomechanical humanoids. Each one of these units are similar because each class of replica are created off an imprint of a singular gestalt. The main character Elster's neural pattern are based off of a soldier, so they are built to be combat engineers. The whole world of Signalis revolves around this concept. You run into other types of units and start reading about what makes them tick, how they function, and what their purpose is. What's interesting though are the classified documents you find that document how exactly the people in charge need to treat them in order to keep them stable and in order. For example, a different unit, the Yules, like to sing and dance because their neural pattern was taken from a ballet dancer. Auras start digging tunnels when they go unstable, and like true bisexuals, they calm down when you give them plants to take care of. That's not gameplay, that's just like a funny lore entry that I enjoyed. Around halfway through the game, you get a fake out ending and then get to see a pretty important revelation. Elster and Ariane, the Gestalt you've been looking for, have actually been in a relationship on their ship for a while. A relationship ship. Yeah. You learn that the ship has pretty much been sent on a suicide mission, told to travel until they find another planet, and if they don't find one, travel until they run out of resources. You learn more about the tragic story of Ariane, a troubled, radicalized youth who grew up outside of the normal societal structures, who willingly signs up to the suicide mission just to be alone and work on her art. She doesn't read on the classified guide to prevent Elster's memories from resurfacing, and through Elster's gained identity, they fall in love and have a grand old lesbian time on their ship. There's always something about the robot that gains feelings trope that really tugs on the heartstrings. And there's a lot of cute cutscenes there. At the end of the game though, you learn this all went to shit. They start running out of food, the ship starts leaking radiation, and Ariane is put into the cryopod to last as long as possible. The ending sequence is when you finally learn what Elster's promise was, which was to kill Ariane and free her from eternal delusion. The multiple endings show Elster going through with the promise, failing to do it and walking away, or dying after waking Ariane. There's also the secret artifact ending where you continue to live on in the dream world, which I just don't have any time to get into, but pretty much Ariane is alluded to having powers that were stronger than those who created the replicas, and that throughout the game Elster's journey is taking place in Ariane's dream delusion world, but pretty much just know that this game is open to a lot of different interpretations. Everything I said could just be completely fucking wrong in your experience, and you could just interpret it a whole different way. I enjoyed the story and themes a lot. It's not my preferred vehicle of storytelling, but I think they did an excellent job for the style they were going for. Both Signalis and Silent Hill are tragic love stories. I think out of the two, Silent Hill had a bigger impact on me, but I really did enjoy my time with Signalis. While I'm on the topic of comparison, let's get into my next segment, things in Signalis that were Silent Hill. Hanging box monster. Jumping down the hole, which I learned is a common survival horror trope. Putting rings on the hands that are out of the door on the door puzzle. Red screen while saving. This means Lisa is also Silent Hill. Now, while I did enjoy this game, there were a few things that held me back from just absolutely slobbering all over it. For a survival horror game, there is just too much backtracking. You only have 6 inventory slots. 1 to 2 of those are always taken up by things you need, like your flashlight or your camera. I never took the camera and just used screenshots instead. And this leads to a very awkward juggling of picking up ammo or key items, or picking up ammo, dropping it off at the storage, and then grabbing key items. It just leads to a lot of retracing of steps. And it's an intentional design decision, proven through propaganda posters about the rule of 6 and the corpse resurrection mechanic. It's created to catch you off guard when you're backtracking through a level. I think this kind of item management didn't end up working too well, and it became more tedious than anything. What's weird to me is about a week after I beat the game, an update dropped that actually goes back on this design decision. They made tools like the flashlight be inherent to your character instead of taking up an inventory slot. and they added an accessibility option to add more inventory slots. I don't want to be like the annoying dickhead gamer, but it kind of shows that a lot of people had this specific issue, and unfortunately it proves that it was a flaw with the game. I'm glad they made this patch, and it's definitely a good reason to play through the game again if you already have. SIGNALIS is an incredible feat for a two-person team. It's insanely dense. I'm sure if I played through it again, I would pick up new appreciations and lore implications that I missed on my first run. This is definitely a game worth playing, and it's worthy of its overwhelmingly positive status on Steam. Now, I started this video talking about Silent Hill and then SIGNALIS, but those games are actually some of the more recent games I've played. It's time to talk about my Resident Evil era. The first survival horror game that I played as an adult, a grown man, was actually Resident Evil 5. Yeah, I'm aware of its reputation and also how it's more of an action game, but hey, the first genre listed on Google is survival horror, so in my opinion, the only real connection this game has to survival horror is the item management and scary guys, but honestly, it feels more like a campy action movie where you fight sick-ass giant spiders, sexy vampire men, and the game fucking ends in a volcano, which is sick. I think despite its obvious issues with the awkward tank controls and somewhat stale story, it's a pretty fun thrill ride, and I honestly believe it gets too much hate. After RE5, I began the Ethan era of Resident Evil games with Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, and I gotta say, this game is amazing. I didn't know much about Resident Evil, but I did know that this game was the start of a huge revitalization of the series, being a first-person game and a whole new protagonist. That beginning sequence where Ethan is locked up in the weird fucked up Baker household is one of my favorite Resident Evil sequences, or horror game moments in general. The genuine fear I felt when Jack busted through the wall was just amazing. This game has really good set pieces, and overall I enjoyed it as a horror game. It's a pretty small map, but the pace of the scares in the game is great. On your journey you meet the different members of the Baker family and also go into different types of horror. The beginning with Jack is a classic slasher hiding from a big monster while they chase you down. The second bug spider lady, which is Marguerite, definitely leans into body horror, and the final design of that boss fight is pretty fucking disgusting. And then with Lucas Baker, it goes into full psychological horror where you have to go through a genuine Saw-esque puzzle room, which I just loved. One of his DLC missions is also like a full-on Saw trap, but you play blackjack, and that was just really fucking cool. Like I said before, RE7 has really good horror set pieces, and it even gets into the typical Resident Evil big monster boss fight, which is pretty sick. I'm not too sure if I'm completely invested in the Resident Evil lore. I am playing them completely out of order, but the story of these games are just insane and sometimes hard to take too seriously. Don't get me wrong, I've been absolutely enjoying these games, but I just can't say that one story of any one individual game moved me like Silent Hill or SIGNALIS did. Of course, after that, I played Resident Evil 8, or Resident Evil Village, and it's the direct sequel to the first Ethan game and features him as the main character. I think plot-wise, this game's a lot more interesting. It leans into more of a fantasy feel with the dragons and gothic structures of everything, but I would say from a horror aspect, I liked RE7 more. The game opens up with a synopsis of the whole game through an animated children's story. You get into a nice cutscene with Ethan's family, and then your wife Mia just gets fucking blasted and your daughter gets kidnapped, which, I mean, this is just an insane start to the game. It definitely pulls you in. I never really know what to expect in Resident Evil games, but this kind of fairy tale angle with all of the main enemies that you'll see in the game was pretty cool, and RE8 has some of the coolest main villains in the franchise. The beginning of the game at Lady Dimitrescu's mansion is really reminiscent of other Escape the Building sequences in this series, but this time it's from a bunch of hot vampires, which is awesome. No, but really the gothic old-timey way Lady D talks is very intriguing, and she is an intimidating ass character. I mean, it really makes you feel small the way she towers over you and chops your hand off and shit, which of course gets reattached because that's Ethan's superpower, I guess. The design of the levels are always engaging, and this is one of the few times in this game where you're really on edge. Now, while I view the Resident Evil games as more action-adventure oriented, that doesn't mean that there aren't genuinely terrifying parts. The doll section with the giant baby was fucking insane. They got the sound effects for giant baby down pat, and I don't know how they did that. The doll creature lady is unsettling as well and just as memorable as the rest of the main bad guys. Heisenberg's a cool guy. The way he says Ethan Winters is just iconic as hell. I really like how his creations have this meat punk aesthetic, and his boss fight's insane too. After installing a FOV mod, the combat in this game was unironically really enjoyable, and the upgrade system in the mercenaries mode was really good. I actually did a whole video on that, so you should go watch that if you're interested. Overall, I liked Village a lot more than I thought. I think thematically the last game was more my taste, but I really did enjoy the different direction this game took. And one of the hugest releases this year was the Resident Evil 4 remake. I never played the original, I'm a poser, but I had to play this because the demo was so freaking cool. RE4 is heralded as one of the best survival horror games, and I can say that it really was a great game. I'm not going to say it's as cerebral as the games I started this video with, but it was definitely a blast. The graphics are absolutely insane. It's one of the best looking games I've played, and it runs insanely well for a modern game. The combat and feel of everything is great. I absolutely love how the physics feel in this game. When enemies throw axes at you, you can shoot them mid-air, you can stagger enemies by shooting them in the legs. The general feel of the combat is so good, and it's really satisfying when you can string together parries and be a complete badass. And this goes well with Leon because he is the stereotypical badass secret agent. He's got one-liners, he's got a cool tactical gun holster, he's sexy. RE4 has a great sense of adventure. There's a lot to do post-game wise with the challenges, and mercenaries is fun as always. It's an easy recommend because I can't imagine many people would be bored playing through RE4. I'm saying now, I really want that RE5 remake in this engine. That'll be fucking dope. Also, quick mention for the DLC that came out recently, Separate Ways, where you play as Ada Wong. She is hot, bro. I had a couple issues with her voice performance. Maybe that's just the direction they're going for, but most of the time she just sounds kind of bored. But it does give a different look into the campaign, which is fairly interesting, and I actually found it a little bit harder than the main game. You absolutely have to be on point with your shots on hard, and I ended up losing a lot of encounters, which was a pretty good breath of fresh air coming back into the game. But yeah, RE4, one of my favorite releases from this year, and it's just good, man. It's just good. I will eventually play the original. I don't know when that will be, but eventually I will. I also started RE6, but only played through a couple chapters. So far it seems like RE5 but better, and I played through Detention, which is more of a point-and-click adventure, but it's a really good horror game based off Taiwanese culture, and it's a pretty good experience. It's definitely a disturbing-ass game that I don't have enough time left in this video to talk about. Yeah, that was my survival horror experience. I really love this genre from the few games I've played of it. If you have any suggestions for games that I should play, let me know. I'm definitely down to play more of these games that I missed out on, whether it be more games in the Silent Hill franchise or other franchises. I think that could be really cool to get into. And if you made it through to the end of this long ass video, please subscribe, check out my other videos. Hopefully it was interesting throughout. But yeah, please share it with anyone who you think would enjoy it. If you haven't even played these games, go play them because they're awesome. And yeah, have a good day, and I'll see you. Bye.